Hey guys, it's great to be here. Cool. So guys, do you like product design, data science, and cute robots? Yeah? Okay, awesome. So you'll probably like this talk. So my name is Jan. I'm a product designer at a transport tech company, Trainline, here in London. And I work mostly on their mobile apps. And guys, I have to tell you something. I love trains. And actually, you know, we're quite lucky that in Europe there's a really dense network of, you know, public kind of transportation, especially trains. And in many countries around the world, you know, that's just not the case. We almost take it for granted, but you know, actually we're quite lucky to have it. And trains are also obviously one of the most environmentally responsible forms of transport out there as well. And you know, we've got some breathtaking, you know, kind of journeys and amazing routes in Europe and in UK as well. You know, amazing views, you know, cute little villages, you know, rolling hills, lakes, mountains. It's just beautiful, right? So just hop on a train, you know, put some music on, you know, nice cup of coffee, amazing, right? But unfortunately, it's not always like that. You know, the experience for people commuting to work during the morning rush hour is quite different from that. Cancellations, delays, disruptions, lots of, you know, annoyed people everywhere, you know, so quite a different experience really. And at Trainline, we'd like to change that. We'd like to make trains easier and, you know, simpler, and also we would like to make trains more accessible to more people around the world. Just wanted to tell you a little bit about Trainline, but don't worry, I'm not trying to sell you anything, just to give you a bit of context. So, Trainline is basically an independent retailer of train tickets. It's a little bit like Skyscanner, it's an aggregator, but we support the whole journey. We do bookings as well. We also issue the tickets and we do post-sales as well. And we sell some bus tickets as well. And I think we've got one hovercraft journey across the sea to Ireland as well. So that's interesting too. We've got a website and app for UK markets, but also for continental Europe. So I was just kind of wondering, how many people have used Trainline, either in UK or Europe? Oh wow, quite a lot of people. Cool. So what I want to say about the rail market, you might not know that, but actually you might be surprised to know that the global size of the rail market is more than $230 billion annually. So it's quite chunky, and as you would imagine, you know, the market is quite competitive, probably like the market you guys operate in. And because of that, we have to move fast, right? So we ship a lot. We ship more than 100 releases per week. On the website, it goes sometimes all the way to like 200 releases per week. On the app, where the release process is a little bit more tedious because of App Store reviews, you know, it's a bit slower, but still every week we manage at least one release, I would say, on either UK or Europe, iOS or Android. And we kind of believe that releasing early and often is really important, especially if you want to grow fast, if you want to grow in the region of, you know, double or triple digit growth. We think it's important, it matters. And just a little bit about the process. We generally kind of follow what a lot of people these days talk about as dual track agile. So this diagram is adapted from work of Marty Kagan, who's an absolute legend. You guys would probably know him. So basically the idea is that you have two parallel work streams. You have a discovery stream and a delivery stream, and you have some sort of a opportunity backlog that basically is a list of ideas, you know, that you groom, and you know, user needs, you know, business opportunities, all that stuff, all that good stuff that then feeds, you know, the discovery stream. And the purpose of the discovery stream is to validate that you're trying to solve the right problem in the first place, right? So that's the most important question you need to answer first. And then B, you're trying to validate if your solutions would be useful and desirable, and at the same time usable for your customers, right? So good old usability. And thirdly, I think you should always try to validate as well, you know, if those solutions you're proposing are actually, you know, viable, feasible in terms of, you know, tech complexity, and if you can actually ship them on time and on budget as well. And you know, it's always a good opportunity in discoveries to engage stakeholders as well. So I think that's another goal of discovery, and that's why we often do multidisciplinary sprints when running discoveries, where we have people from product, you know, we have business analysts, we have developers, obviously, customer service representatives, designers, obviously, researchers, customer service representatives, etc. And then in delivery, the purpose of delivery is to essentially create something that could be shipped. So most likely a sequence of releases that you can launch to bring some value, to deliver some value to your customers and to the business, right? And that's where we turn our experience prototypes that we created in discovery and then validated with customers into, you know, development epics and stories, and produce all the design artifacts we actually need to, you know, build the whole thing. Cool. So I would like to share with you a case study today. It's about one of our data-driven features. It's something we call BUYSBOT in the app. Hello, BUYSBOT. And I really like case studies because, especially the honest ones, because they're really kind of, you know, real war stories from the trenches. And I think it's important to talk really honestly about, you know, things that worked well, but also things that didn't go quite well, because so that we don't get this false sense that everything works out perfectly in design, right? That's just not how things work in reality. So that's what I wanted to share with you today. So BUYSBOT started as an experiment more than 2 years ago. It was basically created by one of our data scientists at the Hack Train Hackathon. Basically, the aim of BUYSBOT is to help you find a seat on a train if you don't have a ticket with a seat reservation, which is quite a common problem for commuters in UK. So that's what we wanted to do with BUYSBOT. The BUYSBOT's first day at school was more than a year ago, and what we released first on Android was quite basic, actually. Nothing special. We usually use Android as a test bed because we have less traffic and we can control the releases a little bit better as well. But what we released was quite basic, really. We were just, I wouldn't even call it an MVP yet. We're just basically displaying some industry data, some existing data about seat reservations, but it didn't have any data science magic yet, and it didn't really help people without reservations to find a seat. So not that useful, but the main purpose of the release was really this thing, this small survey that we basically implemented on this journey info screen that tracks the live progress of the train, so that people traveling on trains in real time could give us feedback. It could basically tell us, you know, if they got a seat or not on that specific train, and then they could tell us, you know, where they were on that train, front, middle, or back. So essentially, you know, the aim is to crowdsource the data so that we can learn from, you know, real kind of situations and then extrapolate in the future. So with this data, so we take the data from people, we then attach some metadata about, you know, the routes people are traveling on, the stations they're between, you know, the time of the day of the week, a bunch of other things. Obviously, we anonymize and aggregate everything at scale, and then we create a predictive data model that basically does two things at the moment. It either tells us, you know, which trains are more or less busy, but also then for specific trains, it tells us where you are more likely to find a seat on that train, right? Front, middle, or back, based on the user feedback. And when we collected enough data, we moved on to design BUYSBOT version 2 for iOS. So we went through a discovery phase again. And we explored the problem space quite broadly, actually, quite extensively. We generated lots of different concepts. This is probably just half of, you know, all the concepts and solutions we explored. We tried a whole bunch of different things, and we often do pair designing as well, where, you know, in discovery we would have two designers kind of working on one thing and almost like pulling in different directions, trying different things, and, you know, bouncing ideas off each other. So we're just basically exploring a whole bunch of different solutions we could launch, and we're, for example, considering two concepts. One would be, you know, basically trying to solve the problem of when you're looking at a journey results screen, something like this, you know, then for different trains that you're looking at, trying to help you decide which train to jump on based on the business of the train. Or we were considering, should we solve the problem of, you know, when you decide for a specific train, where should you, you know, jump on the train, you know, front, middle, back, to, you know, get a good chance of a seat, or whether we could do both, right? We had some visualization tools that were trying to do both, but then it was getting a little bit complicated, really. The screen is quite busy and information heavy as is, so, you know, we said maybe that's a bit too much. So obviously we did multiple rounds of customer research and validation, which actually turned out to be pretty difficult to do. because we couldn't really evaluate the usefulness of some of our concepts precisely, because it's so contextual to your situation, right? To your station, it's contextual to the time of the day of the week, seasonality, and a bunch of other variables. And because of that, it was quite difficult. Also, the other challenge was that back then, our concept prototypes were just basic, Marvel prototypes, smoke and mirrors, no coding, no database behind it, no live data. And to be honest, even if we did have a code prototype back then, the data model itself still wasn't complete, so it wasn't giving, kind of good predictions. So we couldn't really, allow people to test it on their own route. So there was another limitation. And the last challenge and limitation was the fact that most of the testing was done in our offices, in our labs, and obviously, that's not the right context in which people would be experiencing this, right? The right context would be a busy station, in the morning during the rush hour, right? Where you're just like running to catch your train and, kind of really, not really being focused too much on the screen. You can just about glance at it for a second or two. So, slightly different context. But knowing these limitations, we decided to focus on things we thought we could validate with a sufficient amount of confidence. So things like discoverability of the feature, the general comprehension of what it's actually trying to communicate, and things like low-level UI usability. Can people type the right buttons and generally make sense of that? So that still gave us quite a lot of useful insight. So that was great. And then we still had a couple of different directions we could take. We had a bunch of concepts that tested pretty well, all potentially promising, right, and interesting. Now, how do you decide, which one you launch, right, which one you go for? Eventually, we decided to launch one concept that we thought was solving the biggest problem for, most of our customers. And that's one of the things I like about Trainline, in that we try to make decisions fast and just kind of move on, even if we don't have all the answers, because in reality, you will never have 100% complete information anyway, right? So I think it's important not to agonize over it, just make some decisions and then, sense and respond accordingly, get some feedback, answer some of those questions, and iterate. So here's what we eventually ended up launching on iOS as the first release. Basically what it does on the journey tracker screen, if you've got live progress of a train, it kind of tells you where you get a higher chance of finding a seat. So let's say the user is standing at London St Pancras, the train is approaching them, and we tell you that if you hop on the train here, you have a higher chance of finding a seat at the back of the train. And then as you hop on the train and then the train kind of progresses through the journey, this module would be kind of moving through the journey segments, because actually the train business fluctuates quite a lot, right, as the train progresses. If you take the journey from London Bridge to Brighton, a lot of people get off at East Croydon or Gatwick Airport, and the business is really different. It's not the same throughout the whole journey. So it's important to kind of tell you how it changes, because sometimes you might jump on the train, it's totally busy, but we could tell you that 3 stations from then on, you could actually go to the back and you might be able to find a seat there. So that's what we launched. And what was interesting was, and still, we have this survey asking people, still kind of, getting more data to populate the data model. And what was interesting was that when we were launching this, we still knew that there were some small usability issues with those designs. For example, in the last round of testing, we had some participants who thought that these 3 train graphics represented 3 actual carriages, but it's just 3 conceptual parts of the train. So we kind of knew that, but at the same time, we wanted to get it out to the customers, and we wanted to see how it's actually working for people in the wild. And the best way to learn was just to ship it. So that's what we eventually did. And then there was an interesting moment where we screwed up. I promised I'll be honest. So we screwed up. It was an interesting situation. I don't know how exactly it happened. Some miscommunication. Don't know why. We're usually quite good at it. But what happened was that when we were releasing this, one of the people on the team decided to cut the scope of the release in an unfortunate way, because we were trying to get it out and there were other features in that release. And because of that, this part of the micro copy here got left out. And because of that, it wasn't 100% clear. So I thought it was an interesting moment because that's an example of where agile project management and scoping could have really big impact on the user experience. In our case, it wasn't a big drama, it wasn't a big problem because we just released the next iteration quite quickly, and we managed to solve it, so no big drama in the end. When it came to launching it on Android, we tried to fix some of those small usability issues again. So you see, we kind of introduced these slanted lines to make it look more like 3 parts of the train. Also improve the labeling underneath to make it hopefully a little bit clearer. And of course, we designed much more stuff, in Discovery. Things that we haven't launched yet, they're still in our drawers. For example, this about screen that just tells people, how BUYSBOT works, how it crunches the data and generally what it does. And I think it's important to recognize that as designers, not everything that you design, especially in Discovery, will ever, launch. So I think it's important so that we're not, it's important not to be precious about your ideas and your designs because we're problem solvers, right? We're not there to put things in art galleries. So that's all good. And generally, I realized that data-driven products are pretty hard to design. People experience them in lots of different contexts. The data models are still evolving. So our strategy for dealing with that is that we always build in these feedback loops where we ask people to give us feedback in context. So for example, here, this is one of our other data-driven features. It's a tool that helps people find cheaper tickets at alternative times. It's called PriceBot, but don't worry, we only have 2 bots at the moment. So it kind of tells you what PriceBot does, but also there's a link to a survey where people looking at the screen in a specific context can tell us how it's working for them. Cool, so that was the story of BUYSBOT. Now, just let's have a quick look at what some other tech companies are doing in the space of data-driven products and reflect a little bit on what it means for us as designers. So here's one example. Many popular products these days use big data or machine learning to improve the user experience or create new propositions. Spotify is obviously one of them. Why is their music discovery feature so good? Well, obviously it's the data. I heard at one event in London that they have more than 400 data points for every song they carry. They have quite a big data science team as well, and they're making sure that they're using the data in very clever ways, as you would imagine. Another example, Citymapper. They started running their own buses in a couple of cities around the world. Also, they're experimenting with taxis. And the interesting thing here is that they chose the routes on which to operate based on data generated by their journey planning app, right? So they basically identified inefficiencies in public transport in certain cities, and they decided to address them with their own product. And they're branching from a digital, product portfolio to physical product experiences as well, which I think is quite exciting. And in London, it's even more exciting because this is the route that they operate on the night bus, and this is where I drink and this is where I live. Brilliant. Thanks. So there's obviously many more examples we could use. Airbnb, you guys have tons of machine learning features. I really like the tool that helps hosts set prices for their properties in the most optimal way. Again, it's done using big data, where it kind of looks at the type of property you have, the location, the seasonality, and suggests this is the price you should set for a highest chance of actually filling your property. Google recently launched an interesting update to Google Flight Search, where again they're crunching lots of data and they're predicting how flight prices will fluctuate over time. And what these products have in common is that they're driven by data generated by the users of the product, not by the company itself, which is really interesting. So you can see that this data is a really valuable asset for companies because it helps them to kind of create and build new differentiating product propositions. Cool, and just to wrap up, I just wanted to reflect on some of my learnings. So I think for data-driven products, you can't really answer all the questions until you've learned something. You just really have to put something out there and then sense and respond accordingly. And then secondly, I kind of learned to let go of perfectionism because you're running at speed, and at the same time you kind of have to put it out there. And at the beginning, I found it quite scary, but actually, because you're launching things that are not 100% there. But at the same time, I think it's quite liberating, because knowing that you'll be iterating on it next week or in 2 weeks' time actually allows you to be more creative, because you are less risk averse, right? So that's brilliant. And then the third point is that, I think it's important to recognize that, real product design is quite different to the stuff you see on Dribble. I love Dribble, I use it for inspiration, don't get me wrong, but my problem with those sites is that some of the stuff you see on those sites is, these beautiful looking concepts, they're kind of like things that are not really solving any real problems often, or are things that never actually launched. So I think it's important to recognize that some of the most important product design work is actually not very sexy. It's actually, quite mundane and ugly sometimes. And I would like to leave you with one last thought. I think it's a good idea to optimize your design process for the speed of learning, because as designers, we'll be working with new disciplines like data science, we'll be learning new tools constantly, we'll be working with new problems and domains, AR, VR, chatbots, voice interfaces, you name it. And at the same time, we are being asked to work at an increasingly faster and faster pace. Just look at all the hundreds of Sketch plugins that just try to optimize your workflow just to shave off seconds from repeating tasks, right? So I think it's important that you optimize your process for this, because it's really the outputs that the outcomes that matter, not the outcomes like wireframes and prototypes and research reports. So I think that's what we should do. So that's all from me today. Happy to take any questions and looking forward to chatting with you later.